The restaurant was too quiet. It was the kind of silence that usually happens right before something very bad is about to take place. This was Les Lions, a place where only the most powerful people in the city dared to eat. It was owned by him. At the far end of the velvet-curtained room, sitting at a table made of dark, polished wood, was Antonio. People didn't just call him Antonio, they called him the Don. He was the Mafia Boss. Antonio was tall and broad, with sharp, cold eyes that seemed to look right through a person. Today, his eyes were even colder. His men stood at all the exits like statues made of black suits and dark sunglasses, watching everything. Antonio was supposed to be a hero to some people in this city, a Robin Hood who gave to the poor. But many others knew the truth. He was a dangerous man, a bad guy in their eyes. He had made powerful enemies. This morning, something important was supposed to happen. His main advisor, a man he had trusted for many years, had betrayed him. A group of his rivals had paid the advisor to trap Antonio, to take his power, to end him. Antonio didn't know it, but his trusted friend was currently guiding the enemy to this very restaurant. Just as Antonio took a sip of his black coffee, a sound broke the dead silence, a high-pitched laugh like a chime. Every eye in the room turned. The guards froze. From behind one of the heavy velvet curtains, a tiny girl, no more than 6 years old, ran into the room. Her hair was messy, a bird's nest of tangled brown curls, and she wore a simple, faded pink dress. In her hand, she held a drawing, clutched so tightly the paper was crumpled. She didn't look at the big, scary men in black suits. She didn't look at the expensive decorations. Her gaze was locked on the main table, on him. Antonio froze. In his world, children didn't exist. They were kept safe or they were used as threats. This girl was totally unprotected. Before anyone could move, the small girl ran directly up to his table. She was so short her chin barely reached the edge of the wood. She stopped and looked straight into Antonio's cold, sharp eyes. She was breathing fast, not from fear, but from excitement. "Excuse me," she said, her voice small but surprisingly clear in the silent room. One of Antonio's guards started to move forward, his hand reaching for the girl's shoulder to drag her away. But Antonio did something that made the whole room gasp. He didn't even look at the guard. He simply raised his hand. "Don't," Antonio said, his voice a low rumble that echoed off the marble walls. "Stop." The guard froze instantly. Everyone in the room held their breath. They knew a child could be a dangerous distraction. The girl didn't seem to care that she had almost been grabbed. She pulled her crumpled paper closer to her chest and stared intently at Antonio. She looked at his face, trying to see something underneath the cold eyes. She looked at his expensive suit. She looked at his ring, which had the family symbol. Then she opened her mouth and asked the question that made the air itself stop moving in the restaurant. "Are you the bad guy my mom talks about?" The silence that followed her question wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the air before a massive storm. The guards at the door shifted their weight, their hands moving instinctively toward the holsters hidden under their jackets. In their world, a question like that was an insult, and insults were met with silver and lead. Antonio didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his coffee cup halfway to the table. He looked down at the girl. She wasn't shaking, she wasn't crying, she was just waiting. Her eyes were wide and curious, searching his face for a sign. "Your mother," Antonio said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that echoed off the marble walls. "You say her name is Elena." The girl reached out and placed her small, sticky hand directly on top of Antonio's expensive silk sleeve. The guards gasped. No one touched the Dawn, ever. "Her name is Elena," the girl whispered back. "She works in the kitchen at the big hospital. She says you are the man who owns the shadows. She says you're the bad guy who makes the rules everyone has to follow." Antonio's heart, a piece of ice he had frozen years ago to survive the streets, felt a tiny, painful crack. Elena. He remembered that name. 10 years ago, she had been a witness to a crime he had committed. He had spared her life back then, not out of kindness, but because she had looked at him with the same stubborn bravery this child had now. He had told her to run and never look back. "And why are you here?" Antonio asked, ignoring his men who were now frantically gesturing toward the front door. "Shouldn't you be with her?" The girl's lip trembled for the first time. She held up her crumpled paper. It wasn't a drawing of a house or a flower. It was a messy, crayon-colored map of the restaurant they were standing in. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Run at 12 o'clock." "I found this in my mom's bag," the girl said, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. "She was crying this morning. She said the bad guy was going to get hurt today because of a snake. She told me to stay at the daycare, but I ran away. I had to find you." Antonio felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He looked at the gold clock on the wall. It was 11:58. Suddenly, the snake she mentioned clicked into place. His advisor, Marco, had been the one to suggest this specific table. Marco had been the one to insist on extra security at the back, leaving the front entrance thin. "Why would you come to warn a bad guy?" Antonio asked, his eyes darting to the door. The girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic gold star, the kind teachers give to students for good behavior. She pressed it into his giant palm. "Because my mom also said that even the bad guy once gave her a chance to live," she sobbed. "And she said everyone deserves a chance to be good, even once." Antonio looked at the plastic star. At that moment, the heavy front doors of the restaurant swung open. It wasn't the police. It wasn't his rivals. It was Marco, his trusted advisor, leading 3 men with masks over their faces. Marco didn't see the girl at first. He only saw Antonio sitting there, seemingly trapped. "It's over, Antonio," Marco shouted, his voice filled with a cruel joy. "The shadows are moving on without you." Antonio didn't reach for his gun. He didn't signal his guards. Instead, he did something no one expected. He leaned down, picked up the small girl, and tucked her head into his chest, shielding her eyes from what was about to happen. "Close your eyes, little mouse. I'm going to show you why your mother was right about the shadows." The air in the restaurant turned freezing, but it wasn't the air conditioner. It was the look in Antonio's eyes. He held the little girl, whose name he now knew was Mia, against his chest. He used his large, expensive suit jacket to cover her head, so she wouldn't see the snake standing at the door. Marco, the advisor Antonio had trusted for 10 years, stepped forward. He wasn't alone. Behind him were 3 men with cold faces and heavy silenced pistols. They didn't look like soldiers. They looked like cleaners, sent to wipe a stain off a floor. "You're getting old, Antonio," Marco mocked, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "A child? You're using a little girl as a shield? That's low, even for the King of Shadows." Antonio didn't flinch. He looked down at the plastic gold star in his palm, then tucked it into his pocket. He looked at his loyal guards, who were frozen, waiting for his signal. But Antonio knew if a fight started here, Mia would be the first hurt. The bad guy had to make a choice. "Marco," Antonio said, his voice as steady as a heartbeat, "the throne you want, take it. The money, it's in the vault, but the girl stays with me." Marco laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. The girl saw my face. She heard the plan. In our world, Antonio, there are no witnesses, not even small ones. Mia whimpered against Antonio's chest. She didn't understand everything, but she understood fear. Antonio felt her tiny heart beating like a trapped bird against his ribs. For the first time in 20 years, Antonio didn't feel like a boss. He felt like a shield. "She's just a child," Antonio whispered, his grip tightening protectively. "She's a liability," Marco snapped. He leveled his gun. "Give her to me, or you both die right here." Antonio looked at his head guard, Rico. With a tiny, almost invisible nod, the signal was given. But it wasn't a signal to shoot. It was a signal to sacrifice. Suddenly, the heavy wooden table was flipped. Crash! The plates of expensive food and crystal glasses shattered into a million pieces. Antonio dove behind the thick oak table, keeping Mia tucked under him. Thwip! 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 The sound of silenced bullets hitting the wood filled the room. Wood chips flew into the air like snow. Antonio's guards didn't fire back at Marco. Instead, they threw smoke grenades they kept for emergencies. Thick gray clouds filled the restaurant in seconds. "Find them!" Marco screamed, coughing in the smoke. "Don't let them reach the kitchen!" In the chaos and the dark, Antonio didn't reach for his weapon. He took off his heavy leather shoes so he could move silently. He picked up Mia. She was so light, like she was made of feathers, and ran toward the back of the restaurant. He didn't go for the front door where the cars were. He went toward the heat, toward the kitchen. "Is the bad guy coming?" Mia whispered into his ear, her voice shaking. Antonio paused at the kitchen door. He could hear the heavy boots of Marco's men searching the dining room. He looked at the little girl. Her mother, Elena, was the one who had tried to save him. She had sent her only child into the lion's den to warn a monster. "No, Mia," Antonio whispered, his eyes softening for just a second. "The bad guy is already here, but today I think the bad guy is going to do something very good." He pushed open the kitchen doors. The chefs had already fled in fear, but standing by the back exit, her face white with terror and her eyes red from crying, was a woman in a white hospital cafeteria uniform. "Mia!" the woman screamed, her voice a mix of joy and pure agony. It was Elena, but she wasn't alone. Two of Marco's men were already there, holding her arms. They had known she was the leak. They were waiting for the trap to snap shut. Antonio stepped into the light of the kitchen, his suit ruined, his hair messy, and a 6-year-old girl in his arms. He looked at the two gunmen holding Elena. "Let her go," Antonio commanded. The gunman laughed. "You're outnumbered, boss. Give us the kid and maybe we let the mother live." Antonio looked at the plastic gold star in his pocket one last time. He realized that being the bad guy was easy. Being a hero was the hardest thing he'd ever tried to do. The kitchen was filled with the smell of old grease and the cold, metallic scent of drawn weapons. The two gunmen holding Elena looked confident. Why wouldn't they be? Antonio was cornered. He had a child in his arms and no weapon in his hands. He looked like a defeated king. "Drop the kid, Antonio," the taller gunman sneered, clicking the safety off his pistol. "Marco is right behind you. There's no way out of this kitchen." Elena's eyes were wide with terror. "Mia, run!" she screamed, her voice breaking. But the men held her arms so tightly her knuckles were white. Antonio didn't run. He didn't drop Mia. Instead, he slowly knelt down. He placed Mia on the checkered tile floor and whispered into her ear, "Count to 10, little mouse. Keep your eyes closed. When you reach 10, your mom will be holding you." Mia nodded, her small face scrunched up tight as she started to whisper, 1, 2, 3. Antonio stood up. He was no longer the tired man who had been sipping coffee. He was the bad guy again, but this time He was fighting for something real. "You think I'm trapped?" Antonio's voice was like ice cracking. "I built this city. I know every brick in this building." As the gunman aimed, Antonio didn't reach for a gun. He reached for the heavy silver handle of the industrial steamer on the counter next to him. With one powerful jerk, he ripped the safety valve open. Whoosh! A massive cloud of white scalding steam exploded into the room. It acted like a wall of fog, blinding the gunmen. They fired blindly, the bullets hitting metal pots and pans with loud clangs, but Antonio was already moving. He didn't move like a hero, he moved like a shadow. He slid across the wet floor, grabbed a heavy iron skillet, and swung. Crack! The first gunman went down before he even knew what hit him. The second gunman tried to turn, but Antonio was already there, his large hand gripping the man's throat. "You forgot one thing," Antonio hissed into his ear as he disarmed him with a practiced twist. "I'm the villain in everyone's story, except hers." He shoved the man into the walk-in freezer and slammed the heavy steel bolt shut. The steam began to clear. Elena was slumped on the floor, gasping for air. Antonio rushed to her, grabbing her hand and pulling her up. "Get the girl," Antonio commanded. "Now!" Elena scrambled to Mia, who was just finishing her count. 9, 10. Mia opened her eyes and let out a sob of joy as her mother scooped her up. They were shaking, but they were alive. "The back alley," Antonio pointed, to a small service door hidden behind a stack of crates. "There is a black car waiting. The driver is Rico. He is the only one I trust now. He will take you to the docks. There is a boat. It will take you across the border." Elena looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Why? Why are you doing this for us?" Antonio reached into his pocket and felt the small plastic gold star. He looked at the door to the dining room. He could hear Marco's men breaking through the kitchen doors. He knew he couldn't go with them. If he stayed, he could hold Marco back. If he went, they would all be hunted forever. "Because," Antonio said, a small sad smile touching his lips, "she asked if I was the bad guy. I want her to be able to say no next time." He handed Elena a thick envelope of cash from his inner pocket. "Go. Don't look back. Forget you ever knew me." "Antonio," Elena started, but a bullet shattered the glass in the kitchen door. "Go!" Antonio roared. As the mother and daughter vanished into the bright light of the alleyway, Antonio turned back to face the kitchen. He picked up a fallen chair and sat down, right in the middle of the room. He took the plastic gold star and pinned it to his ruined silk lapel. The door burst open. Marco and 10 men rushed in, guns leveled at Antonio's chest. Marco looked around, seeing his men on the floor in the empty alleyway. "Where are they?" Marco screamed, his face red with rage. "You gave up everything for a waitress and a brat?" Antonio leaned back and crossed his legs. He looked at the gold star on his chest, and then up at the men who were about to end his reign. "I didn't give up everything, Marco," Antonio said calmly. "For the first time in my life, I actually won." 10 years had passed since the night the lion of the city fell. In a small, sun-drenched town near the coast, far away from the gray smoke and cold steel of the city, life was quiet. Here, no one knew about the Dawn or the Shadow King. Here, people only knew the sound of the ocean and the smell of fresh bread from the local bakery. In a small high school classroom, a young girl sat by the window. She was 16 now, with the same tangled brown curls, though they were neatly tied back today. Her name was Mia. She was staring at a history book, but her mind was miles away. "Mia," the teacher called out, snapping her back to reality. "The essay is due. Define a hero. Do you have yours?" Mia stood up slowly. She walked to the front of the room. In her hand, she didn't have a long paper filled with facts about kings or generals. She held a small, weathered piece of plastic, a gold star that had been glued back together many times. "A hero isn't always the person who saves the world," Mia began, her voice steady and clear. "Sometimes a hero is the person everyone else calls a villain. Sometimes a hero is someone who decides to stop being bad for just 1 minute, even if it costs them everything." The classroom was silent. She told a story, not about a mafia boss, but about a man who sat in a chair and waited for his enemies so that a mother and a child could reach a boat in the dark. She told them about a man who wore a plastic toy on his expensive suit while the world crashed down around him. After school, Mia walked down to the docks. Her mother, Elena, was waiting there, looking younger and happier than she ever had in the city. They sat on a wooden bench, watching the waves turn orange under the setting sun. "Do you think he survived, Mom?" Mia asked softly, looking at the gold star in her palm. Elena stayed silent for a long time. The news back then said the restaurant burned down. They said no one came out. But a few months after they arrived in this town, a package appeared at their door. It had no return address. Inside was enough money to buy their house and a small, gold-encrusted watch that belonged to a king. More importantly, there was a small note written on expensive, heavy paper. It only had 3 words: "Keep the star." "I think," Elena said, putting her arm around her daughter, "that men like him don't just disappear. They become the shadows that watch over the people they love. He wasn't the bad guy we talked about, Mia. He was the man who gave us the light." Suddenly, Mia noticed a black car parked at the top of the hill. It was sleek and expensive, looking out of place in their simple town. The window was tinted dark, so she couldn't see who was inside. But as the car slowly began to drive away, she saw something flash in the sunlight. A man's hand rested on the window frame. On his finger was a heavy ring with a family symbol, and pinned to the cuff of his black sleeve, catching the very last ray of the sun, was a tiny, plastic gold star. Mia smiled. A single tear of joy hit her cheek. She didn't chase the car. She didn't shout. She just waved a small, quiet goodbye. The bad guy was gone, but the man who saved her was finally free.
If you like this story, please leave a like and drop a comment. Also, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next interesting story. We wish everybody watching a good health and light in our path.